can't believe I managed to forget about her. After everything that happened, that ought to have been impossible. And yet it's been 20 years since I last spoke of Miss Reed. I figured this would be a good time to write it down, if only to get it out of my system once and for all. Then again, maybe this will go away too. My mother had me at 39. She hadn't planned on ever having kids, so when I came along, she had already settled for a certain lifestyle. She tried to pivot as best she could, but habits can be hard to break. She had a lucrative career that forced her to travel a lot, leaving me to be cared for by babysitters, aunts, uncles, and distant cousins. They were kind and generous people, eager to share everything from warm beds to hot meals. And the stories, there were always stories being told. I ended up being a pretty good listener. I kept that trait all the way through high school, and I ended up studying human development and psychology, leading me to occupational therapy. I originally wanted to work with forensic psychology, but when it really came down to it, I wanted to help regular folks more than I wanted to put away bad guys. I started seeing my first patients in the spring of 2003. Most of them were bi-weekly meetings, and after a couple of sessions, many either quit entirely or reduced their visits to monthly, depending on their insurance coverage. Some had more permanent conditions that required regulated psychopharmaca that I would end up seeing over several years. 2005 started off uneventfully. I had to call on a neighbor to help get my cat Romeo out of a tree, but that was pretty much the height of excitement. Then I was scheduled to see a new patient, Miss Reed. Now, I get new patients all the time, but Miss Reed was a bit of an edge case. Most of my patients were assigned from insurance companies, but Miss Reed came to me privately, paying out of her own pocket to see me. It wasn't unheard of, but unusual, especially considering her symptoms. I met Miss Reed on a late Tuesday afternoon in late May. It was pouring down, and I'd had 3 prior meetings. This was scheduled to be my last session for the day. You always have to be a bit extra careful at first meetings. You have to make sure people are at ease. I put out a small bowl of seedless grapes to show that she was expected and welcome. I emptied the trash to show that nothing gets left behind from previous patients. Just these little things remind them that it is a safe space and that they're free to share whatever. Miss Reed stepped into my office with her short afro pulled back into a headband. She had pierced ears but no jewelry, no necklace or rings. Her large brown eyes looked tired, but she tried her best to smile. I introduced myself and offered her a seat, asking her what she would like to talk about. She neatly placed her purse in her lap, took a deep breath, and looked me in the eyes. "I'm not a person," she said. "What makes you say that?" I asked. "That's just the way things are now. I used to be a person, but now I'm not." "Do you know how this change came about?" She adjusted her headband and nodded. A couple of weeks prior to seeing me, Miss Reed had been a helper on her niece's outing for the Girl Scouts. They'd first gone to see Mount Rushmore, then they'd driven far out into the countryside to set up camp. They'd been following the run-along river. Problem was, they forgot one of the tents. Miss Reed went back to get it on her own, and somewhere along that trail, something happened. That's as specific as she could be. Something happened. Pressing her on the matter, albeit gently, didn't help. It's not that she didn't want to tell. It seemed she was unable to remember. "When I got back to camp, I could feel something had changed," Miss Reed explained, "like I'd been struck by a silent lightning." "And that was the moment you realized you weren't a person anymore?" "Not immediately," Miss Reed continued. "It came little by little. I would look at my hand and forget what it was, seeing it like it was a strange animal that crawled into my tent. My heart would skip a beat. Then I'd forget what a yawn was, or how to read facial cues." That first session with Miss Reed was unusual for a lot of reasons, but I made a couple of observations. The whole event had the tellings of a trauma response, that something awful had happened to her along that river, and this was her way of protecting herself. Then again, I could tell there was something off. She had these strange tics, like picking her nose and pinching her cheek. She said it helped remind her that she had a face. I made some notes about dissociative identity disorder, or possible PTSD. Those were the first avenues to explore in our next session. She was perfectly pleasant to talk to, but I could tell this unnerved her. She wasn't sleeping well, and she didn't know what to make of it. She knew this wasn't normal. She wasn't a person anymore. It's like there was a part of her that had been erased, and she kept being reminded of it. We scheduled Miss Reed's second session a week later. There had been a mix-up with the dates, and her name had accidentally dropped off the schedule. My office had a joint administrator that handled booking for a couple of us working in the building, and things got lost sometimes. It happened. I thought I was done for the day when Miss Reed walked in, but she didn't seem all that upset. She offered to reschedule for another day, but I insisted she stuck around. I felt bad about her coming all the way to see me, only to be turned around at the door because of a booking error. "This happens," she smiled. "All kinds of things treat me like I'm not a person anymore. That goes for computers, too. Do you think computers can make the distinction between a person and a not person?" "Everything can. They have to." We sat down and talked a little bit about her upbringing. She was a salt-of-the-earth kind of South Dakota girl. Mid-20s, worked in the family business. The way she talked about it surprised me. There was nothing inherently wrong. For all intents and purposes, there didn't seem to be anything strange about her life apart from that one incident down the run-along river, and she couldn't remember any of it. Before we ended the session, I wanted to ground her in something she could think about until next time. I brought up childhood memories. I figured if I could get her to think about something else than her affliction that might alleviate some of her anxieties. I asked her to tell me about a positive memory. "We had this oak by the field," she smiled. "It had a swing, a tree house, and the branches were so thick you could fall asleep on them. There was this hole where owls would roost. Everyone loved it, played with it. Haven't thought about it in years." "Well," I said, "if you can't be a person anymore, imagine yourself as an oak. That oak, if you will, someone strong and timeless. Those aren't just properties of people. They're things we cherish in everything." She nodded at that, and her smile lingered. "Not a person," she mumbled. "Imagine an oak." It took 2 weeks before I saw Miss Reed again. I was a bit late for work as Romeo got out and ran up a tree. He was by far the most antisocial cat I'd ever owned. You had to bribe him to show his face around people, but the slightest sight of a tree had him sprinting for the door. At least this time, I got him down without having to beg to use the neighbor's ladder. By the time I got to work, Miss Reed was already there. The office administrator had completely forgotten that she was even in the waiting room. I apologized and invited her in, still combing leaves out of my hair. At least Romeo had been kind enough not to scratch me up. "I've imagined it a lot," Miss Reed said. "Being an oak, I think that can be a beautiful thing." "I'm glad you think so," I smiled. "Have you felt any different since we last met?" "I've slept better," she admitted. "I feel more energetic. I eat more. Drink better." "That's good, very good. I think we're making progress." As we talked, I noticed a couple of unusual movements. Miss Reed angled herself so that she faced the morning sun coming in from the window. She would spread out her fingers like branches, as if trying to soak up the sun. The thought dawned on me that maybe I had accidentally replaced one fix idea with another. Then again, as long as it wasn't harmful, maybe it was a step in the right direction. "If you really were an oak, what would you do?" I asked. "I would tell you that it's me," she smiled. "How would you do that? An oak can't talk." I figured that getting her to admit that certain features of being an oak are incompatible with her body as to reinforce the properties of the tree rather than physicality. But Miss Reed just nodded, thought about it for a while, and spoke in a low tone. "I would grow my leaves black and blue. Then you would know it's me." We had to cut the meeting short. I'd accidentally been double booked. Miss Reed didn't mind and told me she'd be in touch. As she hurried out, I got this cold feeling in my stomach. Something about her demeanor had changed, and I didn't know if I liked it. She seemed happier, yes, but there was something else too. After she left, I spotted her standing in the parking lot, facing the sun, her arms spread out, as if trying to catch the rays. I thought a lot about Miss Reed over the coming week. She didn't schedule a new appointment. I had a lot of other patients to work with, but something about her particular problem felt unusual. I'd never even heard of the run-along river, but something must have happened there. It was easy to imagine some kind of assault, but that would have shown itself in other ways. Her entire problem was summed up with a lack of identity, and I couldn't understand the root cause. I didn't see Miss Reed again until late June. I had just finished up a prior meeting and got back into my office. I sat down, flipped up my laptop, and saw two brown eyes staring at me from across the room. I almost fell out of my chair. Miss Reed had been standing there for God knows how long. She didn't have an appointment, and I hadn't heard from her in weeks. She looked different from when I last saw her. Her afro had grown sparse enough that I could see her scalp, and her eyes had grown darker. "They don't pick up my calls no more. The phone forgets to ring." I swallowed hard and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. That sounds very inconvenient." "Makes sense," she mumbled. "Oaks ain't supposed to make phone calls." I noticed she wasn't wearing any shoes. Her toenails had grown long, and the sharp edges got caught in the frills of the office rug. She sat down with a thud, letting her arms hang listlessly to the side like a stringless marionette. I had originally planned to do some office work, but I could tell she wasn't doing well. You have to be careful with volatile patients, even if they don't have a history of violence. Miss Reed was exhibiting some uncomfortable behavior, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. "I keep having this dream," she said. "Something dark comes down the river. The water pools beneath it, making the fish spin in circles long enough to die from exhaustion. There are dragonflies spinning round and round, drawing patterns in the air. Then I see it too. I touch it, and it feeds into me like rainwater to a parched root. And it tells you that you're not a person." She nods. "But not with words," she clarifies, "but with an absence." She tried to get up, but she couldn't quite get the balance right. She winced as if adjusting to sudden back pain. A tuft of hair drifted from her head, crumbling on the plate of seedless grapes. After a couple of seconds, she straightened out, turning completely still. I couldn't even see her breathe. "I don't like what this is doing to me," she whispered. "Why can't I be a person anymore?" "You are," I said. "An oak. That was just a grounding exercise, a way to recontextualize your self-image to something sturdy and positive." "I thought so too, but now I can't stop it. That image is there. It's stuck." "Miss Reed, what exactly do you think is happening?" She walked forward like a child balancing over the stones of a river. I took a step back as she lunged forward, tripping on her own feet. She braced herself against my desk, then pushed herself back up. "I dream about long fingers," she said, "that my bones and nails grow longer and longer and longer. So long they touch the sky, and the farther they reach, the warmer I feel." She stretched her hand, crackling her knuckles. "That warmth is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And in that moment I figured that, if I'm not a person, what's so bad about being an oak?" "What happens when you look at yourself in the mirror?" I asked. "What do you see there if not a person?" Her eyes widened as she pointed at me with a long-nailed finger. "I see a seed." When Miss Reed finally left my office, I barely noticed she was gone. It felt like she disappeared in a blink, but I knew for a fact that she'd been gone for a while. It's like it was getting harder and harder to remember she'd been there in the first place. I wrote down Miss Reed on a Post-it and stuck it to my laptop, then talked to the administrator. She hadn't even noticed Miss Reed enter the building. I felt responsible. Yes, my intentions had been to help, but I'd accidentally aided in her delusion. I'd misjudged just how impressionable she was, and this one suggestion had changed everything. And it didn't look like it was making any changes for the better. If anything, I was getting more worried about her. There is a certain line you shouldn't cross as a mental health professional. You have to separate your work from your private life. I tried not to bring my worries about Miss Reed with me home, but sometimes I couldn't help it. Not because she was constantly on my mind, but because I found myself forgetting about her for large swathes of time. Days would pass without her name even registering in my conscious thoughts. I kept getting surprised to see that Post-it on my laptop with her name on it over and over again. That is, until one day when the note was empty. And in that moment, a thought crossed my mind. Can an oak have a name? Despite forgetting about her over and over, I tried my best to make an effort, a conscious, professional kind of effort. Every time her name was brought up, I wrote it down, but I kept misplacing my notes. I would forget to save documents about her on my laptop. After a while, I started to think about her in abstract shapes and features. Not like a person, but like the way you remember the rubber texture of your favorite playground swing. Sometimes I'd look up into my empty office, as if expecting to see her looking back. I never did. I couldn't get a hold of her through the phone, so I tried reaching her through her family. I considered calling in a wellness check, but I couldn't recall where she lived. The reason I call her Miss Reed here at all is because I genuinely can't remember her first name. I'm not even sure Miss Reed is the right name, but it's the one I think about when I remember her. Her family didn't have much to say. Most of them barely remembered her, while others were making up memories on the fly. I think she finally got a place of her own. Didn't she move in with that guy, the one on, "Oh yeah, I'm sure she's around. She's just busy." But for all their reassurances, I wasn't any closer to actually finding her. And as days turned to weeks, Miss Reed faded from my memory. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't think of her as a patient. Whenever I pictured her, there was something else sitting across from me. Not a woman, not a patient, not even a person anymore. Things were almost normal for a while. I had other patients who kept me busy, and I spent my nights in the comfort of my home, in the company of friends, family, and my cat. I didn't think much of Miss Reed and her unfortunate obsession, and whenever I did, I felt this uncomfortable chill in the pit of my stomach, like I was a witness to something far worse than a mild delusion misleading a troubled person. But notes about her faded. Memories, too. Not that they were completely gone, but it's like they'd been scrubbed out. I remembered her face as a pale gradient, and all details about her seemed misshapen and bent. It was like trying to remember the specifics of a particular tree in a forest. You remember general features, not specifics. You don't count its branches. But when I finally saw her again, it all came back to me. It was late afternoon in early August. I was coming home from work carrying a bag of groceries. I slipped the key into the lock, stepped inside, and paused for a moment. Had I actually turned the key? It felt like I hadn't, but it couldn't have been open already. There was debris on the floor, pieces of dirt and moss stuck on the carpet. There were drag marks as if someone had pulled something heavy into the living room. But what really caught my attention was my cat, Romeo, or the lack thereof. Usually he tried to bolt out the door, but he wasn't even peeking out to see what was going on this time. I called out to him, but I couldn't hear his paws tip-tap in response. I put down the groceries and looked around the corner into my bedroom. Nothing there. I stopped just short of rounding the corner into the living room and listened closely. There was some kind of noise, a rhythmic scratching, like nails against cheap plaster. I shivered as a voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "You know how long it took to get here?" The voice was familiar, but something was off. At first, I didn't recognize it. There was this low, monotone quality to it, like listening to someone speak from behind a thin wall. When my memory finally clicked, all thoughts of Miss Reed came flooding back. "You need to make it all better," she sobbed. "You have to fix this. You have to fix me." I wanted to peek around the corner, but there was something in me that didn't want to. The scratches on the floor covered part of the far wall, and one of my paintings had fallen over and cracked. I could see the gleaming glass shards. "How can I help?" I asked. "You put this image in my head. I was not a person, and there was nothing there. But you put the image there, and everything changed. I need you to take it out. You need to take out the image." "How can I do that? What can I say?" "Just say I'm strong or pretty. You can say whatever. Just tell me I'm not an oak." Something tapped against one of the living room windows as Miss Reed sobbed. My breath trembled as my lips grew cold. "Do you think that would help?" There was a brief pause. There was a creaking sound as a weight shifted on my leather couch. "No," she sighed. "I suppose it wouldn't." I closed my eyes and rounded the corner. I took a deep breath and looked. Miss Reed had closed the curtains, and the ceiling lamp had been torn down. A dying August light was still making its way in from the adjacent kitchen window, casting an orange silhouette of the living room. The place was a mess, like a hurricane had come and gone, And yet in all that chaos, I could see Romeo sitting on her lap, purring his heart out and making biscuits. "I want to be a person again," Miss Reed said. "I don't want this. I want to choose." "It takes work," I said. "Hard work, over a long time. I can help." "No, you can't. I'm not a person to you. Not a person, not a patient, not a human, not a—" "Then what are you?" I interrupted. "What do you choose to be?" "I didn't choose anything. You did. You chose this for me." Romeo casually strolled out of her lap as Miss Reed got up from the couch. Something long and white stretched out of her rib cage, tearing up the cheap living room wallpaper as she stood up. Her skin snapped and popped as she flexed her muscles, breaking apart at the seams. Her yellow toenails had broken into pieces, each section spreading out like a clutter of roots. I could hear the tapping as they poked against the coffee table. She was tall, impossibly tall, and her voice grew darker as she rose, as if her lungs had the sudden room to breathe. "Get the image out," she groaned. "Get the image out now." I ducked behind the kitchen island as an arm swept over me. It knocked over my coffee maker, my toaster, a rack of knives, and my kitchen towels. It all clattered to the floor. There was a growth branching off the edge of her wrist, getting tangled in the outer wisps of my unbrushed hair. I kept close to the floor and hurried into the hallway. I could hear the lumbering footsteps behind me as something hard scratched against the wood. I ducked down and turned a sharp left as a large arm swept over me, knocking over a lamp in my grocery bag. I made it to the bedroom and slammed the door shut, but it bounced as something hard and wooden got in the way. I heard the crackle of a dry branch as something scattered on the ground. I only had a heartbeat to look, but I'll never forget the image of well over a dozen human nails covering my bedroom floor. She forced the door open as I dove over the bed and rushed into my closet. I closed it just as something massive slammed into it, breaking the top hinge and pressing me into the wall. "I can't be like this," she shrieked. "I can't be like this forever." Another push. A screw from the hinges pressed into the side of my temple, causing a warm streak of blood to pool down my face. I had to do something, anything. "Imagine," I wheezed, "imagine you're an oak." "What?" "Imagine you're an oak," I repeated. "Picture it." "No." The pressure eased. I crouched down, covering the side of my head. I could feel the blood slipping through my fingers. "Picture the branches," I continued. "The bend at the bottom as the roots expand into the ground." "No." "The wind rushing through your leaves. The rain soaking into your bark." She wasn't even using words anymore. It was just this long, continuous shriek. She was trashing around my apartment, desperately swinging her arms around like a trapped wild animal. The scream grew louder and higher until I could no longer discern it from a howling wind. "Imagine you're an oak," I repeated. I kept saying it over and over until the closet door collapsed. There were scrapes and cuts along the walls and floor. A couple of branches lay across the bedspread. Looking back at the bedroom door, I could see that there were no human nails, just acorns. And all that remained of Miss Reed was a shrieking wind coming through a broken window. After a couple of days, I had forgotten all about Miss Reed. I remembered it all as a fierce storm and an awful accident. I didn't even question it. It's not that I ignored that it happened, I just remembered it differently. I didn't go looking for her. I didn't call anyone about her. All I did was talk to my insurance company and get my place fixed up. And for a long time, that's how it's been. I eventually moved out of South Dakota when I met my husband. I'm still seeing patients, and I did branch out into forensic psychology in later years. But not long ago, we made a trip back. I was going to see my half-brother in Rapid City when we stopped to stretch our legs. An 8-hour trip is no joke, especially when you got two impatient teenagers in the back seat. As we stood there, and my husband enjoyed a cigarette, I looked out on the open field. In the distance, I saw this magnificent oak tree stretching out an immense crown of leaves. A couple of sunflowers rested underneath, mirroring the shade of its protector. And something in me died as I realized they were all black and blue.